really honored to introduce Chelle Gentemann. Chelle is an advocate for open science and open source software and an oceanographer by training. Chelle is currently working at the NASA's headquarters under an IPA appointment and leading NASA's Transform to Open Science mission. Chelle also initiated a project to create one of the first cloud-optimized NASA datasets on AWS. And she was a co-chair of the National Academy of Sciences and Engineering Committee on Best Practices for a Future Open Code Policy for NASA Space Science. So Chelle's going to be talking about NASA's Transform to Open Science initiative. And Chelle, you can share your screen now. And then we're looking forward to your talk. I think Chelle is still connecting. Maybe there was a small issue with her connection. Let's just give her a few more seconds. She already mentioned that there might be some minor disturbances in the connection. Looks like she's connecting and reconnecting. Okay. Chelle, now the stage is yours. Feel free to share your screen. And we're looking forward to your talk. Okay. I think she's trying to reconnect. We just did the tech check and everything worked perfectly. So this is some unexpected technical difficulties. Started, as long as the connection is stable with audio and video. Very excited to have you here. And thanks everybody for staying throughout these technical difficulties with us.
Do you want me to start sharing my screen?
Yes, please.
Yes, okay, thank you so much for this. Of course, all worked perfectly when we did our tech check right before the session started. So does that work? Everyone can see?
We can see it perfectly.
Perfect. So thank you so much for inviting me here. I was listening to the session before mine, and all of these discussions are really so interesting and so important to have right now. So I'm Dr. Chelle Gentemann. I am the lead for NASA's Transform to Open Science, or TOPS initiative, and NASA has declared 2023 to be the year of open science. We have a team working on the TOPS mission at NASA headquarters, and we're supported by the Open Source Science Initiative, which is led by Dr. Stephen Crawford, and we're within the NASA's Chief Science Data Office. This is, I think, a really important action by a large U.S. federal agency to stand up an office all around advancing open science and to commit to all of NASA science, so across astrophysics, heliophysics, planetary, Earth, and biological and physical sciences, to try and move all of the NASA science towards more openness. And I want to start by sort of telling the story of how how we all got here. Many of you may remember this image. Just a few years ago, this was the first image of a black hole. And this was a real breakthrough discovery. Dr. Katie Bauman developed an algorithm building on open source code libraries. And she paused and she started to note, we're deeply grateful to the open source contributors who made our work possible. And this was really done because of NumPy, SciPy, Pandas, AstroPy, Jupyter, and Matplotlib. The code used to generate this image had over 21,000 contributors. This science was possible because the team was using sophisticated and iterative data pipelines and algorithms that were community developed and tested by the open source community. And this image would not be possible this decade without those resources. And that's community science, and that's open science, and that's creating breakthrough discoveries. Another really huge breakthrough, just a couple months ago in September, for the first time, astronomers have seen carbon dioxide. They've measured carbon dioxide in an exoplanet's atmosphere. This is the first step towards discovering life on another planet. Co-author Dr. Natasha Basala said the open science principles were centered in the early science release work. What this meant is that this is this is data taken from the James Webb Space Telescope. And there was no embargo on it. It was released immediately. And part of why these results were published so quickly was in the years leading up to the data, there was an open science community of over 300 people working together. The data was made public, everyone had access to it, and they worked together. So in the publication, all of the data reduction and scientific interpretation can be replicated because they publish, not only is the data public, but they also publish their software. And the article that they're working on is also open access, and it was published on a preprint server. And this is science now. I mean, it's wonderful, but is all of science this awesome? These breakthrough discoveries that are so incredible that are enabled by open science. So I guess we can ask some questions about what's happening now in science. Can we build on and extend results? We all put a lot of effort. We're funded by federal agencies and philanthropic groups or even private companies. And if we're doing this science to advance science or to advance humanity, can we publish our results and extend it? I mean, is the way science being done now? So this is a 2018 paper that looked at data from in 2012. So in 2011, the Science Journal, so one of the premier journals in science across all disciplines, they require the sharing of data and software upon request. So a 2018 paper went and looked, and they tested 204 of the papers that were published after this policy was implemented. And they said, can we have your data? And 60% said no. And we then, from the 40% that we were able to get, could we reproduce those results? 74% no. Because the software isn't shared and the methodology described in the paper wasn't complete enough to reproduce it. So it's not that there was misconduct, it was just that it's not described well enough. And so this is a high profile papers, and the majority of them, you just can't take the results and build. And this tells us that there's something a little bit flawed in how we're doing and sharing our science currently. Can we rapidly iterate and resolve problems? This is an older paper from 1990. And in 1993, this paper came out in 1990, and it was very highly cited. It pulled together a long series of satellite data, and it said that in the upper atmosphere, the troposphere, there isn't substantial atmospheric warming. Therefore, global warming doesn't exist. And in 1993, the scientists who published this actually testified on the floor of the US Senate about this. So we don't know enough about our science to understand whether or not the climate's changing, and this set climate policy back a decade or two. 1998, another publication says, wow, we found an error. We think there's an error in this analysis, and it looks like the solar wind effect, the decay of the satellites, and the way the satellites were, the orbital time was changing, the local time throughout the day, it wasn't accounted for. So there's an error, and we actually do think it's warming. It does agree with the models. The satellites tell the same stories as our climate models. They agree, therefore, there is global warming. But the software wasn't open, the mission software to process this. So it took another 5 years to actually reprocess that data and show that yes, those errors did exist and they needed to be fixed. That took a lot of money, and this is 13 years after the original paper. And now, only in 2022 is the new information policy that's proposed asking for the mission software to be open. So still, we're struggling to iterate and resolve problems within a reasonable period of time when it's closed science. Can anyone participate? So this is a map. This is actually access to journals worldwide via Wiley licenses. And this is showing you in the bright colored countries that those countries have licensed access to scientific publications that Wiley publishes. So this is all mostly publicly funded research. And those countries, if you are at those institutions, you can then access the latest and greatest scientific results. If you're in any of the other countries, it may be very difficult to get access to recent scientific publications and scientific knowledge and information. And still, so much of it is behind paywalls. And this really prevents a substantial portion of Earth's population from really participating in science, because we have a lot of the publicly funded science behind paywalls, and we restrict who has access to that knowledge. Is science a level playing field? So even if you can get access to that knowledge, can you get funded to do science? Are the way the reviews are being done equitable? So this is a figure on the left. So NASA did a test with, this is just one program. They're rolling it out to other programs now. But for this one program, they tested doing what they call dual anonymous peer review. And what they found is that they looked at gender, and for male and female scientists that proposed to do research for NASA, the success rate was consistently lower for female PIs. So they had people watch an implicit bias video, they added early career researchers to review panels, nothing seemed to really work. But then if they took the names off the proposal, so you didn't know whether it was a man or a woman proposing to do the science, for the first time, and it was repeated twice, the percentage of women who received research funding relative to the number of women who proposed was actually higher than it had been. So it showed that there was a bias in the review process related to gender, for this one program at least. There's also a new study that was just released on NSF that shows systematic racism with the research allocations. It shows that white researchers have a higher success rate than researchers of color. And it's across the board. It's with the public data. They don't have the full data set, but this is what their paper claims, and they've asked for more of the data to be released. So this seems to point out that much like our society, which has these biases in them, a lot of sciences, because we use peer review, these biases then propagate into science and into funding and who's able to participate and who's successful and what voices we hear. And so as we're looking forward, this is the imagery from NASA's Hubble Space Telescope showing the debris blasted from the surface of Dimorphos. This was after the asteroid was intentionally impacted by NASA's DART spacecraft. And the asteroid was deflected. So I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Don't Look Up, but if you're worried about an asteroid and you thought the movie was just about an asteroid, then you don't have to worry about that anymore. But as we look out, we know that there's really big challenges. And we know that there's guaranteed ones that we know about, and there's guaranteed to be ones that we aren't yet aware of. And that means we need to change how we're doing science. We need more we science rather than me science. We need to change to a more efficient, inclusive, kind scientific ecosystem to respond to the next great challenge. And in order to do that, we know we need more people. We need more hands, more eyes, more brains with diverse experiences to participate so that we ask the best questions and find the best solutions. And we know the evidence is in that diverse communities, they ask better questions and they find better answers. And as scientists, most of us are here, right? We're here because we're curious and we enjoy challenges and we like solving puzzles. The more interesting the puzzle, the more interesting science is. And the more diverse communities crafting that puzzle and looking at that puzzle, the more interesting science is. So what can we do about this? We need these new voices. We need this new way of doing science. So open science is accessible, reproducible, and inclusive. It creates research that's cited more. It has a bigger impact. It increases transparency, and it's fundamentally more inclusive. It also is inclusive because it has collaborative projects. It has access to all of the hidden knowledge and equitable systems. It increases participation in science. And we need this. So this seems like a really great solution that not only helps us address these big challenges that are coming in the future, but also helps us address it that we're asking the right questions with diverse participation. So really, like, what's the problem? Why aren't we doing this already? And it's because I think part of it is this misalignment of values and incentives. We have new scientific discovery is valued in our community. It's valued a lot more. There's awards, there's funding decisions, there's career advancement, and it is almost all determined by what your discoveries are, how important they are, and what impact they have. If you spend years carefully curating it, carefully collecting and curating data, whether it's in a lab or from a space instrument, and you do detailed commenting of your software so that many other people can take your software and just use it easily. That's not valued in our current incentive structure. And these incentives are rare. Even if you believe that sharing will give you a competitive edge, most career and grant evaluations don't even ask about open science activities, much less reward them. So there's still this myth of this hero scientist who's going to come and save us all, and it persists in science. So most awards recognize individuals, not teams. Doing collaborative science, it may increase your H-index and make your resume look stronger, but it could also give a pause to hiring committees about what your role actually was in the results, because this whole idea of team science, it's not quite universally accepted yet. And there's a lot of questions about openness. There's a lot of questions about how open. So this is a discussion that's happening right now about James Webb Space Telescope data. So NASA is soliciting the astrophysics community and asking for their input. Right now, this $10 billion investment has, any data that's released has a data embargo on it. And this is a quote on the left-hand side, and both of these quotes are from people who support open science and open data. And one person is saying that embargoes prevent other astronomers from using this fresh data to shape their own observing plans. It reduces scientific efficiency, and this is an expensive instrument. Why aren't we just releasing this data so that we get the best science done? And on the right side, there's an argument that eliminating proprietary time could put people in a position where they can't succeed. And what they mean by that is, well, if I write a research proposal to collect James Webb Space Telescope data, and it takes me 3 or 4 weeks to write that research proposal, get it funded, and get the data collected, but I'm at a smaller institution, I have teaching, I have other responsibilities, I'm not able to just drop everything and analyze the data. If it's released immediately, somebody could come in and make that discovery that I could have made. And that would then hurt my career even after I put in this time. So there's a lot of questions about like how we share and when we share. And a lot of this is how we give credit and how we do science, because changing to open, how does it actually work when science is so incredibly competitive? And we need to really sort of think about, and this conversation about responsible open science, it's just because you can doesn't mean you should. And, you know, we talk about this with our kids sometimes, like they like cheesecake. Just because you can eat an entire cheesecake doesn't mean you should eat an entire cheesecake, because you'll get sick. And like the same thing with science, just because the data set was just released and it's right there, you can jump in and publish on that. But you need to be asking yourself, what are the cultural norms here? Is it okay to use this code, to use this data? Was it developed by a student or a mid-career or senior scientist? Should I reach out to the person who produced that data or that code? How do I do this responsibly so that science continues moving forward in a kind and an equitable and an efficient manner? And where do you find answers to these questions? I think a lot of people in the open science community, we are finding that these questions are coming up over and over again. And being able to have these conversations about what are the expectations around open science. And a lot of it comes down to credit and communications. And it comes down to changing the culture of science and how we think about doing science. So it's still competitive, but it's competitive with kindness. And so we're looking at NASA developing incentives and support for this, for changing the culture of science. And we have NASA, a new open source science initiative. It's funded at $20 million per year. So NASA is putting some real money into advancing the adoption of open science. And it's doing it through 4 different areas: advancing the policy that will allow for open science, advancing the open science infrastructure, the tools, the frameworks that support, the cyber infrastructure that enables open science, funding open science activities, and funding to support all of these open science activities, and outreach. So how do we talk to the community about doing open science and creating a new, kind, equitable future? So this is a slide that I just wanted to have to be part of the slide deck, that NASA is releasing this month, hopefully, a new information policy that really updates a lot of NASA's policy to be aligned with open science activities. There's highlights which are, no data embargoes on publications, on data, software should be released at the time of publication at least. Mission data shall be released as soon as possible. Peer-reviewed publications are openly available. So NASA is actually updating their policy, and then this goes into effect so that activities that are funded after this policy is adopted. So anybody who is proposing, not now, but in the future, it applies to future proposals, those grants will fall under this new open science policy. There's also development in open science infrastructure with data catalogs, publication search, and science platforms. There are 6 funding elements, and I believe another one was just released. I think F15 was just released a day or so ago as a rolling announcement now. So there are new funding put into F15 for high priority open source science. Right now, F14, the Transform to Open Science training, is due in 6 days. So there are research funding opportunities for doing open science. And then there's the outreach. So this is NASA's Transform to Open Science. It's a $40 million 5-year mission to accelerate the adoption of open science with 3 strategic goals: to support 20,000 researchers to earn a NASA Open Science certification, to double the participation of historically excluded groups across NASA science, and to enable 5 major discoveries through open science principles. And the plan is to do that through engagement, through capacity sharing, through incentives, and through broad coordination with other agencies, organizations, and committees and groups. We want to build this with the existing open science community and bring this to the science community. So part of what we're doing is creating an introduction to open science curriculum, and this is a community developed curriculum. The the open science community is coming together to basically group, open source effort this curriculum. And these workshops and materials, the idea is to have the ability to hold virtual and in-person workshops, so slide decks and talking points, and the ability to complete this independently through an Open edX massive open online course. And these materials will all be available openly. We're anticipating them being released in April. And if you complete all 5 modules of this open science curriculum, you will get a NASA Open Science certification. We're working with the community to increase understanding and adoption of open science through our TOPS Champion program. We're having virtual cohorts. We're funding summer schools. We're looking at expanding the curriculum and funding that, and also funding hackathons. That's sort of the fun part. We're looking at going through this. This shows the conferences. So for the 2023 Year of Open Science, we will be, the TOPS team will be at all of these conferences, reaching about 100,000 people, we hope. We're going to be having booths and the ability to sign up for this virtual workshops. And we're really targeting this initial year at mostly US societies, US-based meetings, and NASA scientists. But because all of our materials will be open and available, we really want to engage with other groups and organizations to bring this elsewhere. We have a website that's probably going up tomorrow. Right now we have it as a GitHub and a Jupyter book, but it'll turn into a Jekyll website that will essentially provide resources that says, if you want to do a workshop, here's all the checklists you need, here's all the materials for you. Please go forth and open science. And this is this 2023 Year of Open Science. We're really hoping to use this as the spark to catalyze this cultural shift to open science. We really need to start talking together about how we're doing this. And we have some priorities, which are to release this open science curriculum, to engage with historically underrepresented groups, and to develop open science incentives. This is so basically targeting education, so winning the hearts and the minds, really making sure that the right people have voices in this process, and incentivizing it so that we're not leaving people, we're not asking people to do something without changing the structure that they're trying to do science in. And we'd love for everyone to join us on this open science journey. These are goals that we would like to have for everyone, which is, and we've tried to write these so that they're applicable to an individual, to a research group, to a department, to a school, to a university, to an organization, to an agency, to a country. First would be to develop a strategic plan for open science. So how are you going to do open science, or how is your university going to do open science? How will they support the data repositories, the software, the questions, the communities that want to move to open science? How will they change the policies at the institution? What can they do to support open science? And this isn't something that we need to invent. There is the UN recommendation on open science that provides essentially a roadmap for developing these plans. We'd also like everyone to think about improving the transparency, integrity, and equity of reviews. So we almost all do reviews. And again, you can think about this at these different levels of engagement. As an individual, you may do reviews of papers or research proposals. As an agency, you may hold research proposal reviews for determining funding. For university, you may hold reviews to evaluate tenure and promotion. So how do we improve the equity of those reviews? What is it enough to maybe we take the names off, but are there other ways that we can improve the equity of reviews so that we know biases aren't getting into this process and limiting whose voices we hear? Another part is to account for open science activities and evaluations. So when you have a tenure and review promotion, or when you're evaluating a colleague for a recommendation, let's start asking and accounting for open science activities to show that we value them. And our fourth is to engage underrepresented communities in the advancement of open science. We know that the scientific future, we want it to look different than science looks right now. And in order to do that, we really have to start meeting people where they're at rather than meeting them where they are. And so we need you to help us. And we're really grateful. Thank you for joining us. And I think we're going to have a discussion now. Maybe we have a short break first. I'm not sure. But thank you.
Thank you so much, Chelle. This was a great talk and a great overview of what NASA is doing in this aspect of open science and trying to push towards more sharing of data. So we have a few questions. I think we will just continue on for the discussion as we are already a little bit short in time. There are quite some questions here, so I will just read them out, and then we can see whether in which format we will discuss them. So one question here is, we see an increased interest in open science by like bigger institutions and organizations, like including NASA and UNESCO and many others. Do you think that